The first time he noticed her, it wasn't dramatic or deliberate. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. She moved through the living room with a grace that seemed to belong to a different rhythm of life, the kind of elegance that didn't shout but made the space itself pause. Her laughter, soft and deliberate, floated through the house as she talked to his friend, and for a moment, he found himself frozen, not out of fear, but because something about her presence demanded attention. She had a way of being present without trying, an effortless confidence in the way she carried herself. Her shoulders were relaxed, her posture natural yet poised. The sunlight streamed through the window, catching the strands of her hair in a soft halo, and he couldn't help but notice the subtle shimmer that made her seem almost luminous in that ordinary afternoon. Every movement was quiet, deliberate. The way she adjusted a pillow on the couch, the slight tilt of her head as she listened, and he felt an unfamiliar tug in his chest, a quiet fascination that surprised him. He tried to rationalize it. She was his friend's mom, older, someone he wasn't supposed to see in this way. And yet, he couldn't turn his attention away. There was a warmth to her voice when she spoke, a timbre that made even mundane conversation feel intimate. When she smiled at her son, or glanced toward him briefly with that fleeting, almost imperceptible recognition, it was enough to make his pulse quicken. It wasn't just her appearance, although he noticed that too. The subtle elegance of her clothes, the way her hands moved gracefully when she gestured. It was the way she carried herself, the blend of confidence and quiet vulnerability. She seemed untouchable yet approachable, a paradox that made him both wary and captivated. In that quiet moment, he realized he had started paying attention in ways he hadn't before, noticing the little things no one else would, the small idiosyncrasies that made her human. He found himself thinking about her even after leaving the house. Her laughter replayed in his mind, a soft echo that lingered. The tilt of her head, the gentle way she had looked at him. It was subtle, almost nothing, yet it stirred something entirely new inside him. A quiet curiosity, a fascination that refused to be ignored, had taken root. For the first time, he understood the difference between admiration and something more. Admiration was safe. It was distant, polite. This was different. There was an electric awareness, a fragile tension, a sense that the world outside had faded, leaving only the pull of her presence. It was dangerous in a way he couldn't name, yet impossible to resist. By the end of the afternoon, he left her house with a strange mixture of awe, confusion, and longing. He had crossed an invisible threshold in his own mind, one that he didn't yet understand, but could no longer deny. She had shifted from being just his friend's mom to someone who stirred something deep inside him, quietly, irresistibly, a fascination that promised to grow, unspoken yet undeniable, as the days ahead unfolded. The next time he visited, it wasn't long before their paths crossed in a more deliberate way. She was in the kitchen, arranging ingredients for lunch, moving with the same quiet grace that had captured his attention before. This time, there was a reason to linger. He offered to help, nervously volunteering to carry a tray of dishes or fetch a missing utensil. Their hands brushed accidentally more than once, sending a subtle jolt through him each time, a small thrill that he could neither ignore nor fully comprehend. The conversation began cautiously, mundane at first. They talked about the week, her son's schoolwork, and the small household errands. Yet even in the simplest exchanges, he noticed the layers, the way her voice softened when she laughed, the slight tilt of her head as she listened, the warmth that radiated from her presence. Each gesture was small, yet deliberate enough to make him aware that he was seeing her in a light no one else did. At one point, she asked about his own life, casually inquiring about college, friends, and ambitions. He found himself answering honestly, words spilling out in a way that felt natural, drawn from the comfort of being near her. Her eyes lingered on him with quiet curiosity, not in judgment, but in attentiveness, as if she were reading the spaces between his words as carefully as he was noticing the small details of her movements. He realized that the fascination he had felt before was now deeper, layered with intrigue and subtle admiration. There is a playful undertone creeping into their interactions. Small jokes, teasing remarks, an unspoken acknowledgement of the spark that seemed to pass between them. When her hand brushed his while reaching for the same bowl, he felt the heat of contact lingering longer than necessary. She didn't pull away, and the fleeting moment carried a weight that neither words nor explanation could convey. It was as if the air itself had changed, charged with tension, curiosity, and the faintest hint of daring. Even as they laughed together over a minor mishap in the kitchen, the energy between them was impossible to ignore. Each glance held more than casual acknowledgement. Each smile carried a whisper of something unspoken. He caught himself noticing the subtle movements, the way her hair fell across her cheek, the way her fingers lingered on a utensil, the warmth of her gaze when she thought he wasn't looking. Every detail seemed amplified, alive with a quiet electricity that made his heart beat faster. By the end of the afternoon, the moment had stretched beyond mere conversation or accidental contact. A bond was quietly forming, one rooted in shared presence, mutual recognition, and subtle flirtation that danced along the edges of propriety. He left with a sense of exhilaration and confusion, aware that these small moments were more than they seemed, that every touch, every glance, carried weight and possibility. He realized then that fascination had grown into something deeper, a quiet tension that was at once thrilling and forbidden. The shared moments had opened a door he didn't know he wanted to step through, and the memory of her laughter, her warmth, and her teasing glance lingered with him long after he walked out the door. The spark had become undeniable. It started as a quiet, ordinary afternoon, yet somehow the air felt heavier, charged with anticipation he couldn't quite name. He had stayed behind to help her organize some things in the living room. Books, papers, a few decorations for an upcoming event. The house was calm, still, the usual background noise of traffic and neighbors muted by the walls and the warm light spilling through the windows. He was focused on his task, trying to seem casual, yet acutely aware of her presence beside him. She moved with her usual grace, reaching across the table to straighten a stack of magazines. Their hands brushed, lightly, almost imperceptibly, but the contact sent a jolt through him. He froze momentarily, aware of the warmth lingering where their skin had met. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers lingered a fraction longer, and her eyes met his with an expression that was playful, teasing, yet layered with something more profound. Then, as he passed her a book, she leaned slightly closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that seemed to vibrate in the quiet room. Asterisk, you're just a boy, but I like boys who misbehave. Asterisk time seemed to pause. Every nerve in his body sparked at the words, a mix of shock, exhilaration, and a thrill that bordered on forbidden. There was humor in her tone, a teasing lilt, yet beneath it lay an acknowledgement, a recognition of the tension he had felt but never named. It was playful and daring, yet carried the weight of intimacy, a permission, subtle and dangerous, to acknowledge something neither of them was supposed to voice. He didn't know how to respond at first. His mouth went dry, his heartbeat quickened, and for a moment, he simply stared, unable to reconcile the boundaries he had been taught with the undeniable pull of attraction that suddenly seemed so real. She noticed his hesitation and let a small, knowing smile linger on her lips, soft, unhurried, as if to say, Asterisk, I see you. I know you feel it too. Asterisk, the room felt smaller somehow, the space between them charged with anticipation. Every gesture she made, the slight tilt of her head, the way her hair fell across her cheek, the subtle warmth of her proximity, amplified the tension. He realized that this whisper was more than a teasing remark. It was a doorway, an invitation to explore something unspoken, something thrilling, something forbidden. And yet, the awareness of consequence hung in the air. This was her, the woman he had admired from a distance, suddenly humanized, approachable, and yet still untouchable. The thrill was tempered by respect, by hesitation, by the unspoken understanding of who they were to each other. When the whisper faded, the room returned to its quiet calm, but the effect lingered. Every glance after that seemed heavier, charged with possibility. Every brush of hands, every shared smile, carried a new weight. He left that afternoon with his mind racing, heart still thrumming from the encounter, acutely aware that the line between admiration and something more had blurred irrevocably. The whisper was small, but its impact was enormous, a spark that threatened to ignite a fire neither of them fully understood, yet one they both sensed, waited for, and could no longer ignore. After that whispered comment, the world seemed to shift, though nothing outwardly changed. She acted normally, composed, graceful, the same woman he had admired for weeks. Yet in private moments, he could sense the tension, subtle and unspoken, threading itself through every interaction. She smiled, yet her eyes held an extra layer of caution. Her gestures were precise, measured, as though she were reminding herself, and him, of the invisible line that existed between them. He found himself second-guessing every movement, every word. Even when their hands brushed over a dish or a book, he hesitated, acutely aware of the electricity in that fleeting contact. There was a strange ache in the restraint, a pull in the silence that neither of them dared break. It was frustrating and thrilling all at once, a push and pull that left his chest tight, heart racing, and thoughts spiraling. The quiet distance that followed the whisper was deliberate. She withdrew slightly, almost imperceptibly, yet enough for him to notice. Her tone softened in ordinary conversation, a subtle effort to maintain the barrier between teacher-like authority and personal intimacy. Even in casual moments, there was an unspoken agreement. Curiosity could exist, tension could exist, but crossing the line was still forbidden. He struggled with his own feelings. Every glance she cast, every soft laugh that reached him, was a reminder of the spark that lingered between them. Yet he knew he had to tread carefully. The age difference, her position in his friend's life, the quiet moral codes he had internalized, all of these weighed on him like invisible chains. And yet, he couldn't ignore the magnetic pull he felt whenever she was near. Small moments became loaded with meaning. A brush of her hand as she handed him a cup, the tilt of her head when listening to his words, the warmth of her gaze in passing, all became a secret language he was desperate to decipher. He analyzed everything, replaying interactions in his mind, searching for hints, for permission, for understanding. And in doing so, the tension grew, quietly, almost unbearably. Even her subtle vulnerabilities intrigued him further. He caught glimpses of softness, a fleeting sigh, a rare look of fatigue, a small smile at something private, and they humanized her in ways the initial admiration never could. She was still untouchable in many ways, yet fragile in others, and that duality made the attraction more complex, more intoxicating. By the end of the week, he realized the dynamic between them had fundamentally shifted. The playful spark from the whisper hadn't faded. It had been tempered by hesitation, by distance, by the quiet, careful dance of boundaries. Each encounter was now charged with unspoken desire, curiosity, and restraint. He understood that the story they were living wasn't about crossing lines recklessly. It was about navigating tension, discovering vulnerability, and learning to recognize the pull of something deeply human, quietly forbidden, yet impossible to ignore. Hesitation and distance had become a game neither wanted to fully define, and in that space of uncertainty, the emotional connection deepened. Every moment together carried the weight of unspoken possibility, leaving him both anxious and exhilarated, wondering if they would ever allow the invisible barrier to fall. The rain tapped gently against the windows, filling the quiet apartment with a soft rhythm. Inside, the air smelled faintly of jasmine and warm tea, comforting and intimate. He had arrived to help with small chores, organizing a stack of books, tidying the living room. But the mundane task felt charged with anticipation. The atmosphere was different now. The playful spark from before had settled into something heavier, more tangible. She moved about the room with her usual elegance, yet there was a softness to her today, a vulnerability that had been absent in the structured warmth of their previous encounters. She sighed quietly as she stacked the last of the books, and he noticed the small crease of fatigue between her brows. For a moment, she looked almost fragile, human in a way that made him ache with a mixture of concern and fascination. They talked as they worked, words flowing with ease, yet carrying subtle layers of meaning. She admitted, almost in passing, that she sometimes felt lonely, that life could be surprisingly isolating despite the busy routines and constant activity of her household. Her voice was quiet, tinged with hesitation, as if she feared revealing too much. He listened intently, careful not to overstep, yet drawn into the honesty of her confession. There was a warmth in her openness, a trust he hadn't expected, and it made every glance, every shared smile, feel significant. At one point, their hands brushed while reaching for the same book. The contact lingered just a heartbeat too long, and neither pulled away. It was small, seemingly insignificant, yet it carried weight, a silent acknowledgement of the tension that had been simmering between them. The warmth of her fingers against his lingered, a quiet reminder that vulnerability could coexist with playful mischief, that trust could emerge from moments of intimacy. As the rain continued to fall, the conversation deepened. She shared little stories of her youth, moments of regret, flashes of joy and embarrassment. Each story humanized her further, painting a picture beyond the confident, composed exterior he had always admired. He began to understand the delicate balance she maintained, the strength she projected to the world, the fragility she allowed herself only in rare, private moments. He realized, too, that these small gestures, these glimpses into her inner world, were more intoxicating than the thrill of her teasing or the spark of forbidden attraction. Every smile, every sigh, every subtle movement, the way she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the soft warmth in her gaze, built a connection deeper than either had dared acknowledge. By the time the rain slowed, the apartment felt charged with a quiet intimacy. The unspoken tension between them had shifted subtly, transformed by honesty, vulnerability, and trust. It was no longer just curiosity or attraction. It was a shared understanding, a bond forming in the safety of private moments. And as he left that afternoon, he carried with him the warmth of her presence, the memory of her trust, and the thrilling awareness that their story was moving toward something inevitable, delicate, and profoundly human. Evening settled over the apartment, painting the walls in warm shades of gold from the lamps she had turned on. The house was quiet. Her family had gone out, leaving only the faint hum of the city outside and the soft, comforting rhythm of their shared space. The room seemed smaller, more intimate, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the tension between them to finally surface. They had been tidying up together, arranging a few leftover items from earlier chores. Every movement was deliberate, yet unspoken. Every glance and negotiation of boundaries that neither wanted to verbalize. A playful smile, a brush of hands over the same object, a fleeting touch on the shoulder. Each small interaction amplified the quiet electricity in the room. It was subtle, almost imperceptible to anyone else, but to them it was everything. For a long moment, silence hung between them, filled only by the faint rustle of a page or the clink of a teacup. He felt the weight of the unspoken, the awareness of the attraction that had grown from fleeting glances to whispered words, to playful brushes of skin. And then she spoke, her voice low, deliberate, soft, not teasing this time, but honest. Asterisk, moments like these, they make me feel alive. I enjoy your mischief more than I expected. Asterisk, his chest tightened at the admission, a rush of warmth and exhilaration coursing through him. It was a recognition, subtle yet profound, that the connection they had been nurturing in small, quiet ways was mutual. He realized she wasn't just playful or teasing. She was allowing herself to feel something deeply human, and he was part of it. The thought sent a thrill through him that was almost dizzying in its intensity. Their eyes met, lingering longer than before. He noticed the softness there, the vulnerability hidden beneath her confident exterior, the faint tremor of honesty that she didn't mask with humor or composure. She was still composed, still graceful, but in that moment, she let herself be seen in a way few ever had. And he felt the same, acutely aware of the danger, the age difference, the societal lines, yet unable to suppress the pull that had grown too strong to ignore. A brush of hands over a shared object lingered, fingers touching lightly but intentionally. The warmth spread, not just physically but emotionally, a quiet affirmation of the bond forming between them. Neither words nor confessions were needed. The closeness, the shared breath, the subtle awareness of each other's presence conveyed everything. Every heartbeat, every pause, every glance was a dialogue in itself, speaking the emotions that neither dared voice fully. The evening stretched on in a suspended rhythm, a delicate dance of restraint and acknowledgement. It was not reckless, not a crossing of forbidden lines, yet it was transformative. In that quiet room, filled with warm light and muted city sounds, they had reached an understanding, a recognition of desire, trust, and connection that would shape every moment to come. By the time he left, the world outside seemed sharper, colder, yet he carried the warmth of her presence, the thrill of shared honesty, and the undeniable certainty that the quiet intimacy between them had deepened, ready to blossom in ways both careful and profound. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, painting the apartment in gentle gold and filling the room with a calm, almost sacred quiet. The world outside continued its usual rhythm, yet inside, the previous night's intensity still lingered, soft but undeniable. The atmosphere carried the echo of shared glances, lingering touches, and unspoken words that had been exchanged, leaving behind a warmth that neither time nor distance could erase. She moved about with her usual grace, but there was a subtle lightness in her step, a softness in her gaze that had not been there before. Even in simple gestures, arranging the cushions, pouring tea, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, there was a quiet acknowledgement of what had transpired between them. He watched, careful not to intrude, yet unable to look away, feeling the gentle pull of connection that had grown through hours of shared moments, whispered words, and playful, deliberate touches. Their conversation was calm, effortless, almost mundane in its surface simplicity, yet layered with the weight of intimacy. Words were exchanged about the day, small tasks, even the weather, yet each sentence carried an undercurrent of mutual understanding. Glances held longer than necessary, smiles lingered, and the subtle brush of hands became a comforting reassurance. It was no longer about teasing or forbidden tension alone. It was about presence, trust, and the quiet confirmation that they had entered a space together where emotions could exist safely, warmly, without judgment. At one point, he handed her a book she had been searching for. Their fingers brushed lightly, intentionally lingering just enough to convey a quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. It was a gentle intimacy, YouTube-safe and subtle, yet profoundly affecting. No words were necessary. The warmth in that small contact spoke volumes, a silent affirmation that the emotional bond they had cultivated was both real and mutual. They shared a laugh over a minor mishap in the kitchen, the sound light and natural, blending seamlessly with the quiet morning. It was ordinary, yet extraordinary, a sign that despite the complexities of their age difference, social expectations, and personal boundaries, they had found a space to be themselves. No dramatic confessions were required. The connection had already been acknowledged, nurtured, and treasured through countless small, meaningful moments. As he prepared to leave, she walked him to the door, the gentle light of morning catching her features in a soft, almost ethereal glow. Their eyes met, lingering, and for a heartbeat, words were unnecessary. A smile passed between them, warm, confident, full of quiet affection and understanding. There was a subtle promise in that smile, not of recklessness, but of continuity, of a bond that would persist, growing deeper through the unspoken and the everyday. Stepping out into the morning light, he felt a lightness in his chest, a calm joy that came not from action, but from recognition. He understood that their story wasn't defined by the fleeting thrill of desire, but by shared presence, trust, and the gentle unfolding of intimacy. The quiet warmth of their connection lingered as he walked away, a reminder that love, understanding, and human closeness could exist beautifully, subtly, and profoundly, even across boundaries. In that soft morning, everything felt resolved yet open, a delicate balance of affection and respect, leaving both changed, fulfilled, and quietly connected in ways neither would forget.